The planet was silent, its icy surface stretching as far as the eye could see. For miles, there was only snow and rock, endless and barren. The human explorer, Jason, trudged through the thick snow, his breath coming out in visible clouds in the freezing air. His boots crunched on the icy surface as he made his way deeper into the uncharted wilderness. He had been sent here to retrieve data about this forgotten world, but there was something unsettling about the silence that wrapped around him like a thick, suffocating blanket. The planet had been abandoned long ago, and most of the equipment here was outdated, covered in layers of frost. His mission was simple: take some samples, gather data, and leave. But something about this place felt wrong. After hours of searching, Jason found himself at the entrance of a cave hidden beneath a mountain of ice. He hadn't expected to find anything here, just another abandoned facility left behind by a failed mission. But as he stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop even further. The air grew heavy with an almost suffocating stillness. Jason switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The cold air stung his face, and he instinctively pulled his coat tighter. He moved forward, each step echoing in the silence. In the back of the cave, he saw it. A large metallic structure stood in the shadows, covered in layers of ice and snow. It was shaped like a cage, but not just any cage. This one looked ancient, its design unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were smooth, but they had strange markings, symbols he couldn't understand. Curiosity pulled him closer. He couldn't explain why, but there was something about this cage that made his heart race. As he approached, he noticed the shape inside. A figure, small and fragile, lay curled in the corner. It was a girl, but she wasn't like any human he had ever seen. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent in the dim light. Her long, silvery hair was tangled, and her delicate, elf-like ears poked out from under her hair. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of aliens, of course, but this was different. She was small, no more than a few feet tall, with an ethereal beauty that struck him immediately. She looked so fragile, so delicate, trapped in this cold, metallic cage. He moved closer, his steps careful and slow, as if not to disturb the haunting silence that hung in the air. The girl didn't move, not even when he knelt beside her. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but she was not conscious. Her eyes were closed, and her body appeared to be limp, almost lifeless. Jason looked at the cage, its door locked tight. The girl's position made it impossible to see how she was trapped, but one thing was certain: she wasn't here by choice. Whoever had put her in this cage had done so with cold indifference. He reached out, touching the cold surface of the cage. It was slick with frost, but there was no sign of movement from the girl. The silence in the cave was deafening. "What happened to you?" Jason whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. His words were swallowed by the vast emptiness of the cave. Jason stood up and examined the cage carefully. It was sturdy, made of a metal he didn't recognize, but the lock was old and worn. He tried to pull at it, but it didn't budge. His fingers moved over the locking mechanism, looking for any weakness, any way to release her from this trap. He had to do something. He couldn't leave her here. The girl had suffered enough. There was a deep sense of loneliness in her eyes, a loneliness that seemed to have been etched into every part of her being. Jason couldn't ignore it. It called to him in a way he couldn't explain. He wasn't just an explorer here to complete a mission. He felt as though he had been brought to this place for a reason. This girl needed him. After a few more attempts, he finally found a weak spot in the lock. With a bit of effort, he managed to force it open, the metallic sound of the lock breaking the eerie stillness. The door of the cage creaked as it slowly swung open. Jason took a deep breath and leaned over the girl, careful not to startle her. He gently lifted her out of the cage, his hands trembling slightly as he held her in his arms. She was light, almost weightless, and her skin felt cold to the touch. But there was life in her. She stirred slightly, but she didn't wake. Her face was so peaceful, but Jason could see the pain, the fear, the abandonment in the lines of her face. She had been alone for so long. Jason carefully carried her out of the cage and into the cold, snow-filled cave. He couldn't just leave her here, not like this. He had to help her, to give her a chance at a life beyond this cold, lifeless cage. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but as he looked down at her fragile form, he knew that no matter what lay ahead, he wouldn't leave her behind. The silence was broken only by the sound of his footsteps as he carried her into the unknown. Jason carefully cradled the alien girl in his arms, her small form light yet fragile. As he carried her out of the cold, icy cave, the wind outside howled, biting into his exposed skin. The snow seemed to fall even harder now, swirling in the air like a million tiny frozen daggers. He knew he had to get her out of the freezing wilderness, but every step he took seemed to sink deeper into the snow. With each breath, Jason could feel the weight of the girl in his arms. She was cold, far too cold, and he could sense her exhaustion, her body trembling despite the layers of clothing he had wrapped around her. But there was something else too, an emptiness that lingered around her, as though she had been hollowed out by the isolation she had endured. He trudged on, heading back to his small base camp, which he had set up on the edge of the planet's northern territory. It was a modest shelter, with a small heater and supplies, but it was better than nothing. As he moved, the girl stirred slightly in his arms, a faint murmur escaping her lips. Jason froze, holding his breath as the girl shifted, her delicate fingers twitching ever so slightly. Her eyes fluttered, but they didn't open. She didn't speak, and for a moment, Jason thought it might have been a dream. A trick of the mind, a faint hope that she would wake up. But then, another soft sound escaped her, this time, a quiet, broken breath that made Jason's heart ache. Jason whispered, his voice gentle. "It's okay, you're safe now." He paused for a moment, looking down at her face. She was still pale, her features sharp but delicate. There were bruises on her skin, dark spots that stood out against her blue-tinted complexion. Her long, silvery hair fell around her face like a tangled curtain, but her expression, even in unconsciousness, seemed both peaceful and burdened. Jason adjusted his grip on her, trying his best to keep her warm. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for her, as though he had somehow been chosen to help her, to heal the wounds of her past. But how? He had no answers. The silence between them felt like an impenetrable wall. She couldn't speak, and he wasn't sure if she could even understand him. Still, the moment she had moved, the tiny shift in her breathing, it was enough to give him hope. She was alive. She was still there somewhere. When they reached the camp, Jason carefully placed the girl down on the cot he had set up inside. The heater hummed softly in the corner, its warm light filling the small, confined space. He hurriedly grabbed a blanket, wrapping it around her fragile form to provide some warmth. She was still so cold, but the gentle rise and fall of her chest assured him she was alive. For a few moments, Jason just sat there, watching her. He didn't know what to do next. He wasn't a doctor, and he didn't have any advanced medical equipment with him. But there was something in her presence that made him feel that this was all meant to be. She needed him. And in a strange way, he needed her too. "Stay with me," Jason whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll figure this out. I'll help you." The girl didn't respond. She didn't even stir. Jason sat quietly by her side, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had she been locked away in that cold cage? The cage, he shivered at the thought. Whoever had put her in there had left her for dead. She was all alone, lost in a desolate place, forgotten by the world. As he sat beside her, he felt an overwhelming sadness that he couldn't shake. The girl had been abandoned. And worse, she had suffered in silence, with no one to care for her. He could only imagine the loneliness she had experienced. It was a loneliness he had never known, but now he felt it too. Jason reached out, his hand hovering above her head, unsure if he should touch her. But after a moment, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch seemed to send a ripple through her. She flinched, just a little, but then settled back, her breathing softening. It was then that he felt it. A strange sensation, almost like a pulse. A faint, quiet hum in his mind, as though the girl's emotions were somehow reaching him. He couldn't explain it, but it was as though a part of her was trying to communicate with him, without words. The connection felt real, raw, and unspoken. He was certain of it now. Jason sat back in his chair, his mind swirling with new thoughts. Could she hear him? Could she understand what he was saying? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave her. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. She had no one else, and he wasn't going to let her face that loneliness ever again. For hours, he stayed by her side, watching, waiting, and hoping that she would wake up. Her breathing was steady now, and the warmth from the heater seemed to be helping. He didn't dare fall asleep, too afraid that he would miss something important. But as the hours passed, and the silence stretched between them, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. How could he help her? What would he do when she woke up? And would she ever speak again? The morning light filtered weakly through the small window of the shelter, casting long shadows across the room. Jason sat by the cot where the alien girl lay, still unmoving. He had stayed up all night, unable to sleep, his eyes never leaving her fragile form. Her skin had warmed slightly, but she was still pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Every time she shifted, every small movement, he felt a flicker of hope. Jason had been careful with her, giving her all the warmth and care he could, but he didn't know what else to do. He wasn't a doctor, and he had no way of knowing what kind of injury she had sustained. But what he did know was that she was no ordinary alien. There was something about her, something deep within her presence, that made him feel connected to her in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if their fates were tied together, as if she needed him just as much as he needed her. He had spent hours staring at the strange markings on her skin, the delicate patterns that resembled intricate tattoos. Though they were part of her natural coloring, they seemed to shimmer in the light, a reflection of something ancient and untold. But no matter how hard he tried, Jason couldn't decipher what they meant. He knew nothing about her people or the culture from which she came. As he sat there, deep in thought, the girl's eyes fluttered open. It was only for a moment, but Jason's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, her gaze distant and unfocused, as if still trapped in a dream. Her eyes were the color of the sky just before dawn, a pale, soft blue, and for a moment, Jason saw a deep sadness in them, like the weight of years of solitude, of being forgotten, had taken root in her soul. The girl didn't speak. She simply stared at him, her lips parting slightly, but no words came. Jason held his breath, unsure of what to do next. He reached out a hand, but stopped just short of touching her. He didn't want to startle her. "Hey," Jason said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You're safe now. I won't leave you." Her gaze didn't change, but something in her eyes seemed to shift, as if she were trying to understand him. Jason's heart ached as he saw the confusion and fear in her expression. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from an immediate threat. It was a deeper, quieter fear. The fear of being alone. The fear of being forgotten. "I'm here," Jason said again, his voice gentle. "You're not alone anymore." The girl blinked slowly, her long lashes brushing against her skin. Jason could see her chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, and he could tell she was trying to process what was happening. Her hand twitched slightly, as if she were reaching for something or someone. But then her fingers curled back into a fist, and she lowered her hand back to her side. Jason's heart sank. He knew she was still fighting something within herself, something that kept her locked away in silence. For the next few hours, Jason stayed by her side, offering her food and water, though she didn't take any. He didn't press her. He just let her be, letting the silence settle between them like a delicate thread connecting them. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. Jason tried to find a way to communicate with her. He spoke softly to her, telling her about the planet they were on, about the journey he had made to get here. He talked about Earth, about his family, and about the small things he loved, the warmth of the sun on his face, the smell of rain on the ground. He spoke about anything and everything, hoping that somehow his words would reach her. But she didn't respond. She simply lay there, her eyes never leaving him, listening, but not speaking. It was clear that she had been through so much, and Jason knew he couldn't rush her. He had to be patient. By the end of the day, Jason had done his best to care for her, but the girl remained silent. He wondered if she had ever spoken before. He wondered if she had ever known the sound of her own voice. He couldn't imagine a life so lonely, so isolated. She had been locked away for so long, surrounded by nothing but silence. And now, here she was, with him, yet she still couldn't speak. The silence between them felt heavy, but Jason refused to give up. She needed him. He could feel it. That night, as Jason sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker, he couldn't help but wonder about her past. Who had locked her away? And why? What kind of cruel person would imprison such a fragile, lonely creature? He didn't have the answers, but he swore to himself that he would find out. He glanced over at the girl, still resting on the cot. Her eyes were closed, but he could see the faintest movement of her chest. She was alive, and she was here with him. That was all that mattered now. The silence between them was still thick, but it was no longer the same. There was a sense of understanding, a sense that they had both been through something that bound them together in ways words could never express. Jason knew this would not be easy, but he was determined to help her, to be there for her, no matter what it took. The days passed slowly, but Jason didn't mind. Each day was another step closer to understanding the alien girl, to uncovering the secrets hidden within her silence. He continued to care for her, bringing her food and water, though she rarely ate. The girl's health was slowly improving, but her silence remained unbroken. She had stopped trembling, her skin had warmed, and the bruises that had marred her once pale complexion were beginning to fade, but her eyes still held that distant look, lost, as if she was trapped in memories she couldn't escape. Jason had tried everything he could think of to get her to open up. He spoke to her in soothing tones, telling her stories about Earth, about life, about anything that might bring comfort. He didn't expect a response, but he hoped that his presence might begin to break through the walls of isolation she had built around herself. One evening, as he sat by the fire, the girl surprised him. She shifted on the cot, moving slightly, her hand twitching as if trying to reach for something. Jason stopped what he was doing, his heart skipping a beat. Was she going to speak? Was she finally going to say something? Her eyes opened slowly, meeting his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was the first time in days that her eyes had focused on him so intently. Jason didn't say anything, afraid that his words might shatter the moment. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out slowly, her delicate hand trembling as it hovered near Jason's. Her fingers brushed against his, a soft, tentative touch. Jason felt a spark of warmth at the simple gesture, as though the ice between them had finally begun to crack. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like the faintest breeze. "Don't leave me." Jason froze, his heart racing at the sound of her voice. It was the first time she had spoken, and the words she had chosen were enough to break through the years of silence. He didn't know what to say at first, the gravity of her plea taking him by surprise. He had never imagined that her silence hid such a deep fear, a fear of abandonment, of being alone once more. "I won't leave you," Jason replied softly, his voice filled with assurance. "I'm here. You're safe." The girl's eyes softened, and she pulled her hand back slightly, as if the simple touch had been enough for her. She closed her eyes again, but there was a sense of peace in her features that hadn't been there before. For the first time, she seemed to trust him, really trust him. Jason couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and sadness. He had wanted to help her, to break through the silence, but hearing her speak, hearing that tiny plea, brought a weight he hadn't expected. The girl had been through so much, and she had suffered in silence for so long. She had been locked away, hidden from the world, and the only person she had trusted was him. It was both a privilege and a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. But he couldn't turn away. Not now. The next day, Jason decided it was time to learn more about her. He had a feeling that the girl's past was the key to understanding her silence, and perhaps her future. He gathered some basic supplies, pens, paper, and a few simple devices he had brought with him for research, and began to try communicating with her in a way that didn't rely solely on words. The girl had not reacted much to his earlier attempts at speaking to her, but now that she had spoken, Jason hoped she might be more willing to share her story. He approached her carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. Sitting beside the cot, he looked at her and began with the simplest question. "What's your name?" Jason asked gently. For a moment, she didn't answer, her gaze fixed on a spot just above his shoulder, as though lost in thought. But then, after a long pause, she spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "My name is Elysia," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like a forgotten melody. "I was once a part of a great civilization. We were peaceful, but the war, it destroyed everything. I was taken, imprisoned, forgotten." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sorrow and loss. Jason could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of the memories she was only now beginning to release. He didn't interrupt, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "The others," she whispered, her eyes clouding with sorrow. "They're all gone. I was the last one. Left in that cage, waiting for something, anything. But no one came. No one cared." Jason felt a deep ache in his chest. He had never known loneliness like that, being forgotten by everyone, left to suffer in silence for so long. But he could see it now, in Elysia's eyes. She had been abandoned, and for reasons Jason couldn't yet understand, she had been kept hidden from the universe, as if someone feared the truth of her existence. "What happened to your people?" Jason asked gently. Elysia's gaze drifted toward the small window of the shelter, where the cold, endless sky stretched out before them. She seemed to be looking for something in the distance, but there was nothing to see. "They were wiped out," she said softly, "by those who feared us, by those who wanted to control what we knew. We were more advanced, but they saw us as a threat. They couldn't let us live." Jason didn't know how to respond. The weight of her words was too much to bear. He could only imagine the destruction, the loss, the hopelessness that had led to her being trapped in that cage. He couldn't understand why she had been left behind, but one thing was clear. Elysia was a survivor, and she was stronger than she realized. "I'll help you," Jason said, his voice filled with conviction. "I'll find out what happened. We'll figure this out together." Elysia didn't respond immediately, but she reached out again, her fingers brushing his hand. This time, the touch was softer, warmer, and Jason felt a quiet connection form between them. She may have been silent for so long, but now, Jason knew that her voice had finally begun to rise from the ashes of her past. The days in the small shelter had started to blend together, each one marked by the quiet companionship between Jason and Elysia. Jason spent most of his time caring for her, trying to keep her warm and fed. Though she still didn't eat much, there was a noticeable change in her behavior. She had started to respond to him in small ways. An occasional glance, a soft squeeze of his hand when he touched her, and sometimes just the faintest of smiles. But still, the silence between them felt heavy. Jason had hoped that, as Elysia grew stronger, she would begin to open up more. But it seemed as though there was something holding her back. Despite the care he showed, despite the safety he offered, she still remained closed off, as if some part of her was unwilling to let go of the pain she had endured for so long. It wasn't until one night, when the fire in the shelter's small hearth crackled and popped, that things began to change. Jason was sitting by the fire, his eyes flicking between the girl and the dimly lit room. The warmth of the flames offered some comfort, but it wasn't enough to chase away the quiet tension that hung between them. Elijah lay on the cot, her eyes closed, but Jason noticed that she was awake. He could tell because her breathing had changed, becoming more steady, more grounded. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke gently, though he didn't expect an answer. "You know, I still don't understand why they left you there," Jason said quietly. "Why would anyone lock someone away like that? You don't deserve to be alone." Elysia stirred, her fingers twitching at the edge of the blanket. Jason paused, wondering if she would respond. He had tried talking to her like this before, hoping she might open up, but it had never worked. He wasn't sure why he thought tonight might be different. Perhaps it was the feeling that they had come so far together. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to share her story. For a long while, there was nothing. Jason leaned back in his chair, unsure of what to do next. He didn't want to push her, but he couldn't stand seeing her carry the weight of her memories alone. They had both been through so much, and yet, here they were, survivors of their respective worlds. Then, as if she had been waiting for the right moment, Alicia's soft voice broke through the silence. "I was not always like this," she whispered, barely louder than a breath. "I was once part of a great people. We lived among the stars. We were powerful. We could heal, create, understand things that no other race could." Jason's heart quickened at the sound of her voice. This was the first time she had spoken since they met. He leaned in closer, eager to hear more. "I was a child when it all changed," Elysia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "My people were peaceful, but there were others who feared our power. They thought we were too strong, too wise. They wanted to control us. And when we refused, they destroyed us." Jason felt a deep pang of sorrow for her. He had suspected that Elysia's past was full of pain, but hearing her speak about it, hearing the rawness in her voice, made it all too real. She had been a child, a part of a powerful civilization, and now she was alone. "We didn't fight back," Elysia said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "We tried to reason with them, to explain that we only wanted peace, but they didn't listen. They attacked us, destroyed our cities, our ships, our homes." Jason could hear the weight of her words. The destruction she spoke of wasn't just physical. It was the destruction of a people, a culture, a way of life. He couldn't begin to imagine what it must have felt like to witness it, let alone survive it. "I was taken," Elysia whispered, her eyes flicking toward Jason's. "I was the last to be captured. They locked me away, here, on this cold planet. They thought they could forget about me. But they were wrong. I couldn't be forgotten. I knew I would survive. I had to." Jason swallowed hard. The strength in her voice was undeniable. Despite everything she had been through, despite the years of isolation and pain, Elysia had survived. And now, she was here, speaking to him. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for her resilience. "I don't know why I was left behind," she continued, her voice quieter now. "Maybe they thought I would die here, but they didn't know me. They didn't understand who I really was." Jason didn't know what to say. Her story was heartbreaking, yet there was a sense of pride in her words. Elysia had been through so much, yet she still stood strong, even if it was only in spirit. And now, Jason realized that it was up to him to help her heal, to help her find her place in a world that had cast her aside. "You were never forgotten by me," Jason said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I won't leave you, Elysia. You're not alone anymore." Elysia's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of something like hope in her gaze. She wasn't ready to let go of her past just yet, but she was starting to trust him. That, he realized, was enough for now. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking through the silence once again. Jason smiled, a small, gentle smile. He had a long way to go to help her heal, but tonight they had taken the first step. Together. The days had grown warmer in the shelter as Elijah's strength continued to return, though she still spent much of her time resting. Jason had done his best to make her comfortable, providing food, warmth, and safety. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. Despite the growing bond between them, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking just beyond the horizon. The world outside the shelter, the one he had hoped to avoid, was still full of unknowns. One evening, while Jason sat by the fire, he glanced at Elijah, who was sitting up on her cot, gazing out of the small window. Her expression was distant, her brow furrowed. She had been unusually quiet all day, and Jason couldn't help but wonder if something was troubling her. He stood up and walked over to her. "Elijah, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She didn't immediately answer, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky. The wind outside howled, and the temperature in the shelter dropped slightly. Jason watched her for a moment, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she turned her gaze to him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't place. "They're coming," she said quietly, her voice tense. "The ones who took me. They know I'm here." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had feared that this might happen. He had always known that Elijah's capture wasn't just a random event. It was part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. And now, it seemed, that danger was coming for them. "They will stop at nothing to find me," Elijah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They think I know things, secrets that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. They'll come, and they'll search every corner of this planet if they have to." Jason felt a cold chill run down his spine. He hadn't considered the possibility that someone might be actively searching for Elijah. He had assumed that whoever had left her in the cage had simply forgotten about her. But now, it seemed, they had been watching all along. "Who are they?" Jason asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why do they want you?" Elijah's gaze darkened. "They are a powerful faction. They want to control everything. They know my people had knowledge that could make them unstoppable. They think I have it, that I can lead them to the ancient technology we discovered before everything was destroyed." Jason felt his stomach tighten. He had never fully understood the extent of Elijah's people's abilities, but now it was becoming clear. The power they had once held, the knowledge they had gained, had made them a target. And the faction that sought to control that power was willing to do whatever it took to find Elijah. "We have to leave," Jason said, his voice resolute. "We can't stay here. If they're coming for you, we need to get off this planet." Elijah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. She seemed torn, her expression conflicted. Jason could see the internal struggle in her face, the fear of leaving the place that had been her prison for so long, the fear of the unknown. "I can't run forever," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They'll find me. They always do. My people tried to hide, but we couldn't. I'm not strong enough." Jason knelt beside her, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe." For a moment, Elijah didn't respond. She simply stared at their joined hands, her mind seemingly far away. But then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't hide forever. But I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop them." Jason squeezed her hand, trying to offer reassurance. "We'll figure it out. We'll make a plan. I won't let them take you again. We'll fight back if we have to." Elijah looked at him then, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. She had been alone for so long, her trust broken by those who had abandoned her. But Jason's words seemed to carry weight. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that, for the first time, someone truly cared about her well-being. "You really think we can fight them?" she asked, a hint of doubt still in her voice. Jason met her gaze with a determined expression. "I don't know what we'll face, but I do know this. You're not alone anymore. And that means everything." Elysia sat in silence for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the window again. Jason knew that there was still much for her to process, much for her to heal from. The wounds of her past were deep, and the threat that loomed over them was real. But Jason was determined. He wouldn't let Elysia go back to that cage, to that life of fear and isolation. "We'll leave tomorrow," Jason said, breaking the silence. "I'll get the supplies ready, and we'll head to the nearest settlement. It's the safest option right now." Elysia nodded, though her expression was still guarded. Jason could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else, something that gave him hope. It was the smallest glimmer of trust, of belief that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The night passed quietly, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The threat that Elysia had warned him about was drawing closer, and they had no choice but to face it. But no matter what happened, Jason had made a promise. He would protect her. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The morning arrived with a quiet sense of urgency. Jason had spent the entire night preparing. Supplies were gathered, the shelter was secured, and the small map he had drawn of the area lay open on the table. They needed to leave, and they needed to leave now. Jason had no idea what kind of dangers awaited them beyond the shelter, but he knew one thing for certain. Elysia couldn't stay hidden forever. She was sitting on the cot, watching him with her soft, blue eyes. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of fear and uncertainty. She had never been in a situation like this before. Her life had been one of captivity and loneliness, and now Jason was asking her to step into the unknown. The unknown was terrifying, but it was also the only chance she had. Jason approached her slowly, his heart heavy with the weight of what they were about to face. The shelter, their temporary safe place, would soon be nothing but a memory. The danger was too great. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Are you ready?" Jason asked gently, his voice soft but firm. Elysia didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around the small room, her eyes lingering on the fire that still burned in the corner. The warmth had been a comfort to her in the cold nights, but now even the fire felt distant. Her eyes met Jason's again, and for a brief moment, she seemed lost in thought, as though weighing the future against the past. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I don't know what's out there, Jason. I don't know if I can survive it." Jason knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I won't let you face it alone. We're in this together, Elysia. We're stronger than we realize." Elysia looked at him, and this time, there was a spark of something in her eyes. Trust. It wasn't complete, but it was there, and that was enough for Jason. She wasn't ready to fully let go of the fear, but she was willing to take the first step. That was all he could ask for. "I'm with you," she said, her voice more steady than before. "I'll go. I'll face whatever comes." Jason nodded, a small but encouraging smile on his face. "We'll do it together, one step at a time." He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she stood. The past few days had been hard on her, but now, with each moment that passed, she seemed to grow stronger, both physically and emotionally. She was no longer the fragile, silent figure who had arrived in his shelter. There was a new resilience in her, a quiet strength that Jason admired more than he could express. Together, they gathered their things, simple supplies, food, blankets, and the map Jason had drawn to guide them. The plan was simple: find the nearest settlement where they could regroup, but Jason knew the road would be long and fraught with danger. He didn't know who was after Elysia or what kind of force they would face, but he had made a promise to protect her, and he intended to keep it. As they stepped outside, the cold wind hit them like a wall, but Jason barely noticed. His focus was entirely on Elysia. She was beside him, her steps hesitant but determined, and for the first time, They were not bound by the cage of the past. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape together. They made their way through the snow-covered landscape, the wind howling around them, but they moved forward. Jason kept his eyes on Elijah, watching for any signs of weakness or distress, but she seemed to be holding up better than he had expected. Perhaps it was the shared purpose, or maybe it was the quiet strength that had begun to grow within her, but whatever it was, Jason felt it too. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The world around them seemed peaceful, but Jason knew it was only a false calm. The real dangers were still out there, waiting. They would have to be careful, and they would have to trust each other completely if they had any hope of making it to safety. Elijah finally spoke, breaking the silence that had surrounded them for so long. "Jason, I never thought I would feel this way again." Hopeful. Jason turned to her, surprised by the strength in her voice. "What do you mean?" "I spent so long alone," she said, her voice quieter now, almost wistful. "I thought I would never get out. I thought I would never find someone who cared, someone who would fight for me." Jason stopped walking and turned to face her. His heart ached at her words, and without thinking, he reached out and gently cupped her face. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Elijah. I'm here, and I always will be." Her eyes softened, and she smiled, a small, fragile smile, but it was enough to light up the darkening world around them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jason smiled back. The road ahead was still unclear, and there would be challenges they couldn't predict, but for the first time in a long while, he felt confident in the future. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Together, they would face whatever came next. And for the first time, Jason truly believed that they would find a way to overcome the darkness that had followed them for so long.